And once again, I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation today. Okay. So our agenda today will be covering a few points today. So I'm going to be giving an introduction, an overview introduction to Elsevier in general and the available solutions as procured by the University of Lagos Library, as well as touching base on some of the other solutions that are freely accessible to you as well, that we believe could help support you during your research, especially during the lockdown. And then we'll be starting to, after that introduction on the Elsevier solution, we'll be moving forwards to writing manuscript parts. We'll be giving an overview on writing papers and what kind of different sections of the paper and few advice on writing each of those sections before we move forward to ethics pointers and zooming in a bit on what I would like to call an introduction to best practices regarding plagiarism. And then we'll be moving forward to using Mendeley to cite references. And then we're going to be having our concluding remarks as well as Q&A as received from you during the webinar. So just as a little bit of getting to know one another. So usually people know Elsevier as one of the major publishers when it comes to journals, for example. And the thing is, Elsevier has recently actually expanded more than 20 years ago to not just being restricted to publications and publishing. Elsevier defines itself now as an information analytics business that is designed to support both researchers in different scientific fields as well as health practitioners. And we believe it's our role to not just provide you with the content, it's providing people, researchers and health practitioners with both the content and the technology that will help them achieve better efficiency, better effectiveness with their work, and actually turn that knowledge into actionable, turn information into actionable knowledge as well. And the idea is that we work closely with institutions to actually help them progress science, advance healthcare, and improve their performance in general. And this is part of what we're trying to do here as well. So just because usually people, when they think of publishing, they start thinking of passing a paper to the editor passing the paper to reviewers, and then going back and forward till the paper is published. But currently Elsevier is trying to build solutions that helps researchers from even starting the research and starting the research questions all the way to what happens after publishing and research evaluation, networking, finding academic employment opportunities, building research collaborations. So we're trying to provide different solutions and different products to everything surrounding the research. Many of those solutions are actually available and accessible for researchers for free as well, and we'll be touching base on some of those as well. So we know that you have a lot to do on your time between writing articles, grant applications, finding ideas, teaching, staying up to date, finding collaborators, writing papers, securing funding, supervising other staff. It is quite a lot. It's a very demanding field to be in academia, and we know that the work you're doing is very important, and it's helping change people's lives all over the world and in your local communities as well. And what we're trying to do is to provide technology that helps you actually do your tasks in less time with less stress, to actually help you increase the effectiveness and the efficiency of your work as well. So these are some of the solutions we have, and as you can see here, so part of what we're doing here lies under the Researcher Academy initiative, which is a free website of Elsevier full of online training courses that are certified. So these are basically, so these are interactive classes that you can take online. You can get a certificate for each class, and you can take a certificate for an entire course of classes as well when you finish them. It's available for free. The website is entirely built for free, and it basically covers basic skills that are not related to any, like, not related to any other specific Elsevier products, or subscription based products. So skills like finding, writing, getting published, peer review, building collaborations, getting funding for your research. There are classes and trainings for every of those topics as well. During every stage of the research itself, usually research starts with discovering ideas, discovering what happened in a specific field, and discovering what are the literature related to those ideas as well. So you should be able to use, so part of the technologies that we provide is that we collect data about the research that happens across all publishers, not just Elsevier. We have the world's biggest abstract and citation database, Scopus. It covers all fields equally, and it covers research that comes only from reputable sources and reputable journals, conferences, and books. So that you can actually, it has a lot of technology to help discover a field, track down what's going on, or what we call a research landscape for this topic. What are the most important papers, and to help you zoom into the papers that you should actually be reading for your literature review. So you get statistics over the entire research field in your area, and you are able to zoom in on only the papers you actually need to read. Scopus does this equally for all different subject areas. There are other solutions that are focused on specific areas, for example, engineering or biomedical research. Then there comes ScienceDirect, which is the first platform for a publisher. Elsevier as a publisher, all the content published by Elsevier, whether it's journals or ebooks, are available on the same platform, which is ScienceDirect. It is worth mentioning that Elsevier currently is the world's largest STM publisher. Elsevier publishes around 18% of all the journal papers being published globally from reputable sources. And it's not just the quantity of our publications that we're proud of, we actually are very proud of the quality of the publications we offer, being way beyond the industry average, if I may say conservatively. So it is actually both having a mix of both those quality and quantity that we're proud of. There are specialized solutions that actually combine content from Elsevier and sometimes maybe other publishers as well, and they focus on specific fields, whether they're geoscience or chemistry like Reaxis. But there is also a specialized solution for the medical literature specifically, and it combines journals, it combines books from multiple from Elsevier in a way. So these kind of solutions, because they are specialized, so like Clinical Key, they not only provide the full text, they are actually helping you extract the information that you need out of those full text journals and books. So Clinical Key primarily serves researchers in medical fields and health sciences as well. So the point of organizing sources and citations, this will be our main topic here today, and we'll be giving you an overview for Mendeley and how to use it to adjust those citations. So at this point, so if you have been following with your discovering your research area, following up with the literature and getting the information you need out of it, and if you're doing your actual research work, and then comes the point of writing it up. So we'll be discussing this a bit today on writing research papers in general. Once you have a good manuscript that's ready to be submitted, one of the very new trends that you will find in academia currently is called preprints. Preprints is one of the really new updates, I would say, to academic publishing. And the idea of a preprint is that you can actually share for most journals, especially those who are not double-blind under double-blind review policy. So many journals have a policy based on their guide for authors that allow researchers to share the research that has not been yet peer-reviewed by the journal. So the same manuscript that you submit to a journal, you are allowed for most journals to share it online with other researchers, so that you can actually give other researchers a sneak peek or an introduction to the actual results that you have actually accomplished. And the thing with handling preprints, they have to be taken. So if you are reading a preprint yourself as a researcher and you're reading it, you have to treat it very, very critically, because you know that preprint has not yet been peer reviewed, meaning that other prominent researchers in the field have not verified the content of this preprint or yet. Sometimes people publish or share papers that they have not yet submitted to journals, or what we call a working paper. And the reason they do this is that they want to get early on feedback to their work before they actually start submitting it to journals. And that's perfectly fine, because many journals, or the majority of journals, have policies that allow sharing preprints or working papers. An example for journals that would not accept this kind of sharing would be journals that operate under double-blind peer review. Double-blind peer review meaning that not only, so single blind means that you don't know who the reviewer is, and that's standard for any peer-reviewed publication, that the author should not know who the peer reviewer is, because the peer reviewer or the reviewer should be at liberty to criticize the paper freely without feeling any sort of, for example, an embarrassment or being a little bit shy to give strong feedback on the paper. However, some journals have it both ways going. So it's neither the reviewer knows who the author is, as well as the author not knowing who the reviewer is as well. I'm receiving feedback that some people are having a bit of an issue trying to access the webinar. If you know anybody who's unable to join the webinar and they have registered for the webinar today, please kindly let them know that they should probably update their Zoom client. Sometimes older Zoom, if they haven't updated the application, sometimes they are unable to join a webinar as well. So back to what we were discussing a bit earlier. Yes, and when it comes to double-blind peer review, because the peer reviewer should not be able to trace or to figure out who the author is. So having that author sharing that same paper that is under review under his name kind of beats the purpose of having a double-blind peer review. And this is why journals with double-blind peer review, for example, they don't permit authors to share the work unless it has been fully peer reviewed. But for journals that work on single blind, they should be able to freely access to just share their work. And we have a platform dedicated for just that. It's called SSRN. It started off with social sciences. Now it includes many other hard sciences as well, including, for example, including biology or medicine or technology and engineering, for example, and many of those are categorized by their specific topics. So it is a very good way to stay up with early stage research that has not yet been peer reviewed. SSRN is a website that's freely accessible to all researchers. It has features that are of use to institutions that want to adopt it formally, but for any of the researchers attending today, please feel free to use SSRN as both readers to go discover research that has early stage on and still has not been peer reviewed yet, or to find working papers and give feedback, as well as use SSRN to promote your own preprints and your working papers, and if valid, also open access papers that you have that has been peer reviewed and published, and you have the right to share as well on SSRN. Then comes the point, if I have prepared a working paper, I got feedback, and I selected a journal to publish in. This is where it comes a little bit of a tricky, because the majority of rejections happening in publishing, they occur with a very common reason for being out of scope, for improperly choosing the journal to publish your work. And there are many advices, because that's a topic for an entire presentation actually, or an entire webinar, for how to select the journal that's most suited for your work. However, I'm going to be giving only a few quick points on that. One of those is that you can actually use bibliometric databases. So for example, Scopus, you can actually use Scopus as you're getting statistics on what's going on the research topic that you are choosing. You can actually use Scopus to actually discover which journals are most interested in which years about your topic. So for example, a journal could have a topic that is clearly listed as part of their scope, but you can find out using the statistics driven by Scopus, for example, that this journal has been very actively publishing on this specific field that you're working on, or this specific research area. For example, from 2015 to 2017, but ever since 2017, they haven't been really interested in that point. Whereas another journal has been picking a lot of interest since 2019 on the specific area that you're working on. So this gives you an indication that the second journal is probably a better option to submit your paper, because we see clearly as an evidence, as statistics show, that this journal is growing interest on that specific topic that you're working on, for example. And Scopus helps you do this across journals from the entire academic community, as long as these journals are trustworthy and are not predatory journals. So it can help you do this kind of selection as well. If you are choosing Elsevier specifically to be your publisher, then you can actually use artificial intelligence tool built by Elsevier called the Journal Finder that you can see on the left of the screen here. It's journalfinder.elsevier.com. And Journal Finder, you can put in your title, abstract, and keywords. It will use artificial intelligence to suggest which journals of Elsevier are best suited for your topic. And it will also show you different aspects, like what kind of model does this journal works on. So many journals allow subscription articles. So subscription articles means that the articles are free for a researcher to publish, and the researcher does not pay any money, or the author does not pay any money, and the journal cuts its or covers its operating cost from actually the journal subscriptions, because that article will only be available to institutions that are subscribing to Elsevier journals. So in this model, your article is free to publish, but it takes a subscription for a reader to access it as well. And that's still the model, that's the original model of publishing. Really, it's been implemented for almost 400 years now. And it's still adopted by about 70% of the publications happening globally, that researchers do not actually have to pay to publish, but readers have to have a subscription to actually access the article. Another model is called the Gold Open Access model, which is a newer model that's only been presented for the last the word open access actually started about 20 years ago. And open access means that the author or the institution of the author, or the funding agency that's giving money for the researcher to do their work, this institution is actually will be covering the cost for the publisher end, and thus the article, the finally prepared article, will be freely accessible to readers all over the world, with or without subscriptions, free to read. But in this model, the covering the cost comes from the author's end, and this is why an APC, or an article processing charge, is actually needed from the author end. This model covers around 20 to 30% of the publications happening globally currently, but it is picking a lot of favor, and it's actually having a very strong movement, for example, in Europe, and it is actually picking up pace as well. Moreover, so that is another topic for maybe another session, is to discuss more clearly the different models, because subscription models have options that can make the article open access after a while, either what's called a green open access policy, where the author are allowed to share their work legally after in terms of the accepted manuscript, after a specific embargo period of time, which is called green open access. There are other models that employ different kinds of open access schemes, like diamond open access, or delayed open access, or what we call open archive as well. If you so choose to publish with an Elsevier journal, then all the Elsevier journals are located on ScienceDirect, so your article appears on ScienceDirect as a platform. If you're choosing any other publisher or any other journal as well, it's part of your academic freedom as well. And the thing is, just make sure that this journal is trustworthy, and this journal follows proper academic procedure, and that this journal is actually indexed into Scopus, because not only Scopus certifies the quality of a journal across all publishers, Scopus also keeps track of your of the performance of your article, and it gives you metrics for your paper, for the authors, for the institutions, and the data from Scopus are primarily used by university ranking agencies all over the world. For example, QS World Ranking or Times Higher Education, they rely exclusively on the research as seen on Scopus to evaluate universities. So if your research is not in a journal that is indexed into Scopus, then it will not be seen or counted by ranking institutions like QS and Times Higher Education. Some other ranking agencies as well employ data from Scopus, as well as similar databases as well. And the thing is, Scopus indexes journals for free as long as they meet the quality criteria that are set by Scopus. And we have a tool that's called SciVal that's based on providing in-depth analytics for Scopus as well. So we will be seeing, so all the solutions that you see on screen are integrated in a way within Scopus. So you should be seeing some data from Embase or Engineering Village or Reaccess or SciVal. You can see snippets of data integrated from these solutions within Scopus currently, which is accessible for all University of Lagos attendees. As said, University of Lagos has subscriptions to journals as well as ebooks on ScienceDirect platform as well. So they should all be you should be able to, as a University of Lagos member, whether you're staff or student or even admin, should be able to access all the solutions that you can see on screen. And as I told you, Scopus integrates some basic features from the other solutions that were available on the previous screen, whether they are specialized subject indexation from Embase and Engineering Village, and it also includes some insights that are based on data from SciVal as well. So, there are a few slides that are a recap for what we've been describing a bit earlier. So Scopus being the largest abstract and citation database, and there are some introductory features about Scopus that I'm going to be sharing with you on the slides. You should have access to these. One of the things that we're really proud of is the geographic, having a more I would say a better global diversity representation on the journals being indexed into Scopus. We're not there yet, and it's something that is of great importance to us to discover more quality journals in the global south, whether it's Africa or South America or South Asia, and discover more titles to be indexed into Scopus. So if you are an editor for a journal and you want to have it indexed into Scopus, I would strongly advise you to get in touch to see to discuss a little bit in more details the Scopus indexation criteria and how you can get your journal to be indexed into Scopus for free as well. Scopus covers subjects across all fields: social sciences, life sciences, health sciences, and physical sciences and engineering. And these is an introductory slides of some of the criteria being implemented by Scopus for indexation that will be available in the slides for your peer use as well. And one of the things that are offered by Scopus, and there are very few services available globally that can do this, is to track who's citing who. And if you are tracking who's citing whom, you are better informed to actually keep track of the quality of one of the indicators of the quality of the research as well. And if I might say it a bit more in more exact terms, citations actually help you figure out the impact that's created by the research within the academic community itself. Because if a paper has been cited 1,000 times and the paper has been cited only 3 times, then you know that the first paper is probably creating more impact. But the thing is, this has to be comparisons based on citations has to be done within papers within the same field. You cannot compare apples and oranges, so it's not fair to compare a paper in medicine with a paper in history, for example, because health sciences and medicine fields, they attract a lot of citations, so the average citations for these fields are way too high. And history, for example, it is a field where the norm and the average are very low citations per paper. So sometimes having 10 citations for a history paper could be a great achievement, while having 20 citations on a paper in medicine is not as impressive as having 10 in a history paper, for example. So we just need to make sure that comparisons are done within the fields, and that's a topic for maybe another discussion. On using research metrics. Moving forward, if you are a University of Lagos, if you are affiliated with the University of Lagos, you have access to Scopus. If you are currently working from home, then you can still access Scopus from home, as well as accessing Scopus from campus. So any computer that is connected to the network at the University of Lagos campus should be able to access Scopus just by typing scopus.com. However, if you try to access scopus.com from home, you will see a page that's called Scopus Preview. So it looks like this one, and that's the free part of Scopus. So so anyone anywhere can download very few basic content from Scopus, coverage guide, source list, or discontinued list, as well as getting some insights on some of the ranking for the journals, and that's accessible for everyone. However, to use the full power of Scopus to actually empower your research with the capacities of discovering research landscapes, running searches, and narrowing down on literature review, so you would need to have a subscription that's provided by your institution. So once again, if I'm working from home, so and I'm personally currently working from home, so how do you still get to tell Scopus that you are affiliated with the University of Lagos, where all members of the University of Lagos community should have access to Scopus? What you would need to do is click on Check Scopus Access. And here you will need to insert your institutional email. Once you have inserted your institutional email, you will receive a notification, an email for confirmation that is sent to your institutional email. And once you click on the link on that email, you'll be sent back into Scopus and you'll be granted access. Any other time. So you just need to start creating an account on Scopus with the same institutional email and the password, and you'll be able to access Scopus anytime you want from home just by using your institutional email. Um, So if your email has not been registered before, you get two options where you can continue anonymously, which is not really recommended, because the next time you will try to access Scopus from home, you will also receive a second confirmation email, and you'll do that every time. To save yourself the hassle, you'll just register your email on your institutional email onto Scopus. So once you've confirmed the institutional email the first time, you click on register now. You'll see your email set as default. You put in your given name, your family name, and your password, and you click on register. And that's how you have a permanent account on Scopus that will give you access to the subscription on Scopus. And one thing you need to know is that all features on Scopus are accessible for all University of Lagos, for anyone who's using the network of University of Lagos or working from home, but they have an institutional email for University of Lagos. Next, just an overview, a very quick overview on ScienceDirect. As mentioned, so this is the home of all Elsevier journals and books that are directly published by Elsevier. As I said, about 18% of the content that's being published worldwide is published by Elsevier, and we are more proud of our citation share because journals in Elsevier are overrepresented in terms of citations. We get more citations than our actual volume. So 26 of all the citations being made by researchers worldwide, they go to other articles that are being published by Elsevier. And also, we are very proud of our books as well, because our relative citation impact among other scientific book publishers is 2.1. So that means that the average citation rates for Elsevier books is actually double the average for other book publishers as well. So there are many subject collections or many subject areas that are being covered by by ScienceDirect. You have full access to all the journals included under the engineering subject area, which are 230 journals. However, if you need a paper that is related to any other subject collection, there is a setup on ScienceDirect for you to get access to other papers that you need from other subject collections. You have to make a request on ScienceDirect that will be forwarded to your university library to be approved. And once approved, you should have access to that paper that you needed from all other subject areas being provided by ScienceDirect. So you have direct access once again to 230 journals covering engineering subject areas on ScienceDirect, and also you can request access from your university library to a paper that's listed under any other subject collection as well, and your university library will review that request. If granted, they will give you access to that paper as well. There are different setup for access, as I said. So there is the engineering subject collection, and you have access to what's called the article choice. You click on get access on ScienceDirect on a paper that you don't have access to, and you will fill in a form that will be forwarded to your university library. You also have access to Elsevier ebooks. So actually, it's been very recently that 24 new books were added fully to your library holdings as well, available on ScienceDirect. And because of the current circumstances we're working on, we are trying to help bridge the gap a little bit. So if you are identified as a member of the University of Lagos University or any other, so you can actually get access for free as well. And it's on temporary basis to 254 books, textbooks on ScienceDirect. It's just that this has been added to all our partners worldwide. So these 250 titles, these are textbook titles that have been added to all university libraries worldwide that are partnered with Elsevier. And you can download the list of those textbooks if you click on that link that you can see on the screen. This will be an Excel file. So if you are accessing ScienceDirect and you are showing using remote access that you are affiliated with the University of Lagos, you will have access to those 100 titles as well. Also, in general, and this is something available for all public, so even outside the university campus, there are more than 37,000 articles and book chapters that are related in any way to the current COVID pandemic. These are freely accessible to anyone, anywhere, with or without remote access. And also you can create a free account on ScienceDirect and set up an alert. So whenever any new publication that's related to your search is actually, you'll actually be able to access those articles as long as the current pandemic and the Elsevier info center for COVID-19 still remains. And just a reminder, there is more than just PDFs that you can do on ScienceDirect. There are a lot of technological features that are available on ScienceDirect that are designed to actually help save your time as well. But that's maybe a topic for another time. So how do you make ScienceDirect know that you are a member of University of Lagos? If you scroll down on any screen or any web page that's related to ScienceDirect, at the very bottom ribbon, you should be able to see a link for remote access. If you click on it, or if you just use this shortened link, you will be taken to a page that looks either like this. So this is very similar to what we saw on Scopus, and you put in your institutional email so that you'll have the same process as Scopus. Or for some of our users, and these are equally the same, you can see like a less stylish web page, so it might also look like this. And in both cases, you just insert your institutional email here and you click on continue, and you'll be sent a confirmation email. Sometimes it needs to double check which organization you're affiliated to, but you receive a confirmation email that looks like this. If you click on activate remote access, you should actually check your spam or junk if you're not receiving that email. If you click on that link, you'll be sent back to ScienceDirect. If you have an account already on ScienceDirect, you'll be just asked to put in your password. If an account was not created with that university email before, you will be asked to create an account and to register. Once you've done so, your account is set for access on ScienceDirect. And this is a process that should remain valid for 6 months. Every 6 months or so, you will need to revisit that as well. Moving forward, as I told you, so once you have shown ScienceDirect that you are actually affiliated with the university, any other time that you are on ScienceDirect, you can actually click on sign in to actually sign in with the preset remote access account. You will be able to access all the journals that are related to the engineering subject area, as well as the books that are being provided by the University of Lagos, as well as the textbooks that are available till the August 31st. So you have a month of access to those 254 titles as well. If you are running into any other article or any other book chapter that's not part of the university subscription, you can still request it from the University of Lagos library, and that's an option that's not really, that's quite unique to the University of Lagos. So you can click on get access and fill in a form, and that will be forwarded to the University of Lagos. But to fill in that form that will go rightfully to the University of Lagos library, you need to activate remote access from home to show ScienceDirect that you are a member of the University of Lagos. Okay, so moving forward with writing manuscript parts and visiting different aspects of the manuscript itself. I would like to just ask you a question now.
Carly, can I
yeah.
say something? Maybe I don't know whether there are questions because I can see people raising up their hands.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody want to ask question in that your presentation that you just did, or introduction to Elsevier and available solutions. Is there any question in that area? If there's no, you continue.
Okay, so I believe we can cover in a few questions before we move into the next section. But if I may, I would like also to use the time to ask the attendees as well. So they get to ask me and I get to ask them as well, if they would allow me. So it's just a get to know them question. If they have ever published a paper already on a Scopus indexed journal, that will help us move along with the next part. I'll be reviewing the questions as you've mentioned, Dr. Okiki, and maybe we can discuss 2 or 3 questions while we wait for our attendees to fill in the form.
The form is not activated, the button. I'm trying to click on the button, is not activated.
So you should click on this.
Yeah. Sorry, the host and panelists cannot vote. So
yeah.
Okay, it's clear. Yeah, thank you.
So just going back to the questions. So just if you see any question that you'd like,
I will flag it. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Please continue with the writing manuscript parts.
Yeah. We've also discussed that. So there is one question: does Elsevier publish articles in education? Yes, Elsevier has journals that cover education fields. Much is the publication fees? That depends on the journal. So as I said, some journals accept subscription articles, so you don't have to pay anything for fees. Some journals are fully gold open access, so they only accept articles that are published under the free to read model, where then the cost is being covered by the author. And many journals have both options, and in that case we see many people opting for the subscription model, where they don't have to pay fees for this. Will publishing preprints online be wrongly interpreted as having published ones? That's not really the case, because a preprint has to be clearly stated that it is a preprint, and they have to exist on a preprint server. So a preprint server like SSRN or Archive or any other specialized preprint server, it's clearly indicated that this is a paper that is a preprint. It has not been published. It's not affiliated with a journal, and it does not affect your copyrights when you, or the journal's copyright when you publish the peer-reviewed journal as well. So because if it's online, it has your name and it has a date, then no one else can plagiarize your work as well. To access SSRN, you just need to go to www.ssrn.com. Is SSRN for working papers. SSRN covers working papers, preprints, as well as gold open access fully published articles. Okay, so moving back to our topic today, and please, because I'm seeing some questions on chat, if you have questions related to the topic, please address them.
There is a question, a student saying that I'm a PhD student of University of Lagos. I don't have institutional email. How can I access? That question, you need to come to get to the PG school, or you go to CITS with all your details. You will have your institutional email. That's to Mr. Olawale. Then another question that I want you to also address.
Sure.
At ABC Agbola, is it possible for participant to have? No, we have said that the participant will have access to the recording video. So I think let's move forward because of time.
Yeah.
Let's go to the.
So for the poll that we've received, and I'll be sharing the overall results, we have the majority of our audience who did not start writing papers as well. But we also see people who are, a lot of people who are preparing their first manuscript. And we also see a very significant, so it's a very close breakdown with people who have actually published papers before as well. So I'll be revisiting the manuscript part before we go down into the writing without plagiarism part.
Quick one,
So
Khalid.
yeah,
What happened is that why you see the percentage of those who say they don't have their paper on Scopus is simply because majority have not actually accessed Scopus to know if their papers are indexed in Scopus. I think with this training, they will be able to know that they have their maybe 5, 6 publication already indexed in Scopus.
I certainly do hope so. And please go to scopus.com, do an author search under your own name, find out if you have a profile that has been created for you on Scopus. Once you've published more than one paper, you start having a profile associated to you on Scopus. And if you have any other papers that you receive, so sometimes if there are different spellings for your name, for example, or someone who's changed their name after marriage, for example, in these cases, Scopus are unable to link both different versions of the name. So sometimes you can have multiple profiles created on Scopus. You can go and give feedback to Scopus, telling them I'm both, yeah, telling them I'm both persons at the same time. Dr. Okiki, we might be having a little bit of an echo. Yeah, it is resolved now. Okay. So yeah, and that is really important to go to Scopus and give feedback if there are any adjustments that need to be made to your profile. So on writing research papers, so how do you get your research published and promoted? Basically, starting off on a good topic that's interesting to readership worldwide is a very good starting point. Collecting your data from reputable journals is very, very important as well. Nobody trusts a research whose references are shady or not trustworthy. Writing high quality manuscript, you have to work a little bit on your writing skills, on how you're presenting your information. We're going to be giving quick advice now. And when you are choosing a journal, make sure that you'll be publishing in a journal that is trustworthy. You're not publishing in a predatory journal or a journal that just wants to rob you of your money that you will pay. For example, if they are claiming to be an open access model when they are not really a journal, they're just there to collect money. And there are some work you need to do to promote your paper after it's published, whether you're participating in conferences, whether you're building videos and innovative illustrations for your work. Some people prefer to write a lay summary, which is a summary for the research being done for the ordinary, for the average Joe, for someone who's not specialized in the field, to get a hint of what the topic is. And the question is, are you ready to publish your work or not? And that depends. If your work advances the field that you're working in, then you're definitely ready. So there is an up-to-date review of a subject or field. There is a significant enhancement that you're doing, that you're adding to the field of science. The results you're presenting are original, or the methods you are providing are inventive, then this is definitely something that needs to be published. But if you are working with a duplication of work that has already been done, or something that no one is really interested in, so imagine that in 2020, if I work on research that's related to coal-powered trains, for example, that doesn't really make any sense because there aren't coal-powered trains anymore, so it's not relevant. That's a very crude example, but it can be very tricky if you go into specific fields, because something that was very valid in 2015 in some fields is ancient history, for example, in 2020, and it's very important to catch up on those trends. So these are a few questions that you need to ask. What have you done new? What's challenging in your work? Is the work related directly to a current topic of high interest? And have you provided solutions and added value to to that topic or not. And the general structure for a paper, so if you're writing a paper that's original research, meaning that you have your own research results that you're going to present, it consists of title, abstract, and keywords. And then comes the main body of the paper, the introduction, the methods, results, and discussion, and you finalize with your conclusion. And there are parts that come afterwards, like acknowledgement, acknowledging other people who have contributed to your work, references, as well as supporting materials. There is also a very famous kind of other papers that's usually requested from editors. So what's called a review paper. So a review paper does not offer original research that's being done. It mainly summarizes the current state of the art in a specific field. So it also has title, abstract, and keywords, but instead of having methods and results, there is a body and main text that goes through the important aspects and the current state of the art of a specific field. It also finishes with a conclusion, acknowledgement, and references, with the possibility of adding supporting materials. The thing is, the core of your paper is, if you're doing a research paper, it would be the methods and results section. The parts in red are the core of your paper. It's what you write first, and you tailor everything else based on those. Okay, don't start writing your paper top down. That's usually a very inefficient approach, and it leads to a lesser quality manuscript than when you actually start with your contribution, whether the methods, results, analysis, and discussion, or it's the content of the review paper describing the state of the art, and then you start building everything around it and update it as your results drive you as well. Effective titles are there to attract readers' attention, contain the fewest possible words, and containing the significant keywords that will attract the people's attention to actually go through the paper. Adequately described content are informative, but then again, concise. It's easier for people skimming through different titles of papers to actually fall on a shorter title than actually to fall on a very wordy, something like 16 or 20 words title. It will probably be overlooked. And the title has to identify the core of the paper. You have one sentence to get your readers' interest, and you have to choose it very, very wisely to catch that attention as well. The abstract is one of the most technical parts in writing, in crafting for your paper. So once you have attracted the reader's attention, the reader will decide whether or not they're going to go through your paper or not based on the abstract. So you have to summarize, you have to pitch the idea you're giving in a paper in the brief 500 word. It's usually 500 words. If it's otherwise, the journal will tell you on the guide for authors, but you have usually 500 words to get people to commit to reading your paper. So you have to summarize the problem, how you tackled it, your method or methodology, what did you find, and why, what is the value of those findings and conclusion you've made. So 4 main elements that have to be covered in the abstract. If your abstract does not check all those 4 elements, it's probably a very weak abstract. And you need to work on it to make sure that you've captured all 4 main corners of an abstract. Make it interesting, make it understandable, and keep it also as brief as possible. You don't use references in your abstract. The references for your work are available on the original text. Abstracts does not have references, okay? And it has to be your own words, as we will be discussing when it comes to plagiarism as well. So these are more points for abstracts. So a few things that you need for abstract. So this is the first impression you will give for your paper. Reviewers, when editors send requests to reviewers to review your paper, they send in just the abstract and ask the reviewer, are you interested in reviewing this paper or not? One of the main reasons your paper can get delayed for publishing is that reviewers are not taking your paper. So although the editor accepted your paper to go into the review cycle, reviewers are not taking your paper. So you have to make a very strong sell for your idea just by the abstract to get the reviewers committed to going through your paper as well. Remember that the only parts of your paper that are freely available if you're publishing under subscription model are the title and abstract. So search engines look for papers based on the title, abstract, and keywords. So use these wisely to put in the keywords that people will be searching for, because that will determine the visibility of your research. And the other points have already been covered as well. So of course, if you are having more people reading your paper, you will get more visibility for your research. Keywords, these are the labels, these are the hashtags you're using on your paper. These are the main things that indexing and abstracting or search engines will be looking for. So keywords, then title and abstracts, that's how it works for machines. It should be specific, and you should only use established abbreviations like, for example, DNA, but don't go use an abstract, a keyword that will not be understood by the readership of a journal. Okay, so don't go too specific with the abbreviations that are not generally known. Usually in keywords, just expand the expression unless it's known for everyone. So people are actually more familiar with DNA, for example, than the expansion or the full expression expressed by DNA. So these are, when it comes to introduction, so you put a brief context to the readers, you address the problems, you identify what other researchers have reached, what are the solutions offered, what's the limitations, and most importantly, you are positioning your work in the great context of the science. So this is what everybody's been doing to tackle this problem, and this is where the value of my work is added. Okay, so you're doing that positioning in the introduction. You would expect that the heaviest usage of references in a paper would be in the introduction part, because you will be mentioning a lot of the research that has been done to tackle this area, what you have been building your work on, what are the limitations of the other research that has been done or the other approaches, and where your research fits in that giant scheme of things. So this is the part with the heaviest usage of ideas from other papers or referral to other paper as in references. And this is the part usually that is that is the part that is where we see a lot of plagiarism cases. And let me tell you, even if it happens with good intentions, it is still counts as plagiarism as well. And the last point will be laying out the layout of your manuscript. So by the end of your introduction, you will letting the people know, because you've actually established why your work is important. You will telling them what to expect in the remaining of the paper in terms of a layout. Do not reuse introductions, even if you wrote them. Self-plagiarism is a thing. Recycling your work is a definite no. You have to write a unique introduction for every paper you're writing. Methods, this is the part where you're describing the problem that was being studied. You put in a lot of information. You put in a lot of information for the paper that you're working on. And so it has detailed information, what materials you used, what devices you used, what approaches did you use, if you're using analytical or numerical methods, for example, which approaches did you build on. And just do not go over the details. If the procedure has been well described in another literature, just refer to it, refer to the method, and just give a brief intro for your readers, and give them the reference where they can go into more details about that specific method if it was invented in a separate paper, and identify the equipment and materials to be used. So this is a part, if you are using a text similarity engine or a plagiarism software, this is the part where you can usually get a lot of text similarity. And it should be okay, because, for example, if there is a very standard way that's used across the entire topic of research that you're working on, so people use material X, they mix it with material Y, and they put it in a device Z, for example. In that case, so everybody who's be working on that field is expected to use a variant of X, a variant of Y, and a variant of the device, for example, that's being used. So there are some text similarities that are based, that can be found on the methods part, and they do not count usually as plagiarism. And that's a part I'll revisit again on differentiating between what the plagiarism softwares can detect and what's actually plagiarism and what's not. Results, this is the part, this is the core of your paper. This is your work. So if you're writing an original paper, this is the heart of your paper really, and this is the part you should always start with. So this is what you've actually done. These are the data of only primary importance you're using. Please make sure that you're organizing it well. They are clear and easy to understand. Highlight the main findings. So if you have a lot of data that has been generated by your work, highlight, tell people what's important, what's really exciting about those papers, what's unexpected that you found. Include even, describe even the outliers. So for example, if you've been running that experiment 50 times and there are a few instances that did not work as well, just mention them. Okay, sometimes you can find something really that was totally unexpected and it led you to a discovery. That's very, very important, and it's very interesting to mention as well. Always try to provide statistical analysis, include illustrations and figures. And this is a very important thing I'm going to mention now. So results are your own original contribution in the paper. This is 100% yours. So having similarities appearing in the results are definitely frowned upon. This is the part that's heart of your work. And the results you're mentioning, the data you're mentioning, has to be entirely yours. You cannot use anyone else's data, whether or not they have been detected by a plagiarism software. That remains irrelevant to the idea as well. The discussion is the interpretation of results. It's very important, or it's actually the part that describes the value of the results part. It's the part where you are making the best argument for the value of why your work is important, and make the discussion corresponding to the results and complementary to it. If possible, always try to establish a comparison between the results that other people have established and your own results as well. Be careful not to go into hyperboles. Don't go beyond what the results can support. Don't make interpretations that are not really supported by the data. Keep your expressions very specific. If you are coining new terms, and that's quite a practice, so sometimes people create new terms. If you are creating a new term in your discussion, properly define it if you are using it, and don't use speculations based on imagination. Always remain connected to the data you have actually presented. On the conclusion, try to be very clear, provide justification for the work, explain how other people can build on it, and how it advances the state of knowledge. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky with the references. So don't use too many references that's not needed, because the citations you will be making will be counted against other people's work. Make sure that you fully understood the material you are referencing. Use the style assigned by your institution, or by, if you're doing your dissertation, or by the journal that you're publishing on, and make sure to use credible resources. It's just a very basic reference. Or a very basic idea. There are proper ways to mention a reference. We just don't copy and paste the link. You have to properly identify who's getting the credit for this publication, starting with the author, article title, journal title, what year was it published, where can I find it in the journal or book, and what database could it be found, when it was accessed, for example. And there are different standards for how the reference is being written and what's called the reference style. You will need to link the reference being made to the actual part in your text that's related to your reference. This is called an in-text citation. And you have to properly alert your reader that the part they are going to read next comes from a reference. And this is called the integration of sources with writing. And I'll be revisiting this within a few moments. For review papers, just make sure you're dividing them to subheadings. Make it coherent with an outline. Each paragraph covers just one idea. Consider several references for each paragraph. Don't use it's very not good practice to use one reference per an idea. If you're using a review paper, then you're doing a comprehensive overview of the state of the art and what the research has found, and establish a linkage between all those body of literature and all those different papers as well. Supplementary materials, these are attachments to your paper like raw data, process data, softwares, tables, figures, videos, audios. These are things that increase the visibility of your paper. Papers who have research data attached to them are actually more likely to get cited as well. So just as a recap for the elements of the paper: title, abstract, keywords. The main text starts with introduction, methods, results, analysis and discussion, and then comes conclusion, acknowledgement, references, and supporting materials. If you're having a writer's block, one good idea is always to start with your own outline and try to make it as detailed with sub-bullets and sub-bullets as possible. And always, when you are writing your paper, start with what you fully own. And what you fully own are your results. And based on those results, your analysis and your interpretation, your discussion for those results. So these are the parts you should always start with. The last thing you need to visit is definitely the abstract. This is where you are quoting, or this is where you are packaging and summarizing the entire paper. So write that summary based on the fully mature version of your manuscript. Do not start with writing the manuscript before you actually write your own work. So if you are building an article, the first thing you need to write is your figures and tables. So present your data, say how you got them in the methods part, and the visualization for those results, then the discussion and the interpretation of those results. After that, start writing your conclusion, and then give how this work fits in the great scheme of things and the body of literature in the introduction. And remember that in the introduction, it finishes up by describing the structure of the remaining of the paper. And the last thing that should be put as a cherry on top is the title, abstract, and keywords. Following this process for writing guarantees that your work will remain connected to your research more than other people's research, and will help alleviate immensely your reliance on other papers. If you start by writing your introduction first, this is where you are starting with other people's work. And this is where you can start to get attracted heavily into improper usage of other people's content. If you are writing your introduction last, your reliance on other people's ideas will be on need basis, and this will help you with the next section of our presentation now. Just as a reminder, always use a spelling and a grammar checker. So even if it's integrated into your word processor like Microsoft Word, or even if it's a specialized solution. So for the paragraph that you see, I will ask you to identify, so how many, so just let me launch a poll for that. So how many mistakes do you see here in that paragraph? If you have written the paragraph yourself, it will be far more difficult for you to figure out the spelling and grammatical mistakes. So always have a second reader going over your text. You're much more critical when you're reading someone else's work. You have a fresh eye to actually start seeing the mistakes. So not just using automated spelling and grammar checkers, always have somebody proofread your manuscript. Okay, and because our eyes, when they do skim reading, they skip mistakes, but you will find out now that the majority of the mistakes on this screen are really embarrassing, if I might say. I wrote it myself, so I get to say it's embarrassing. I hope you're okay with that. So while we wait for more of your input on the polls, I believe, okay, so once we've reached 30%, that should be okay to move on. Okay, so the majority of people have seen 4 mistakes. However, there are actually 6 spelling mistakes into that paragraph. So this is why it's really, really important, because even though actually on the first look, you are not able to see much spelling mistakes. When I wrote that paragraph, I ended up not noticing the mistakes at all. And it took me to revisit them later, actually, to start finding those spelling mistakes as well. So actually, for the majority of people have detected actually 4 of those. Anyway, so it happens all the time, and this is why it's really important. When it comes to research ethics, there are 3 most common forms of ethical misconduct that the research community is I would say, plagued really with. The worst of which is fabrication. Fabrication is where you are making up research data. It is plain lying about your research. If you are religious, it's definitely a sin to lie. If you are on ethics, you actually might be compromising people's lives. If you are making up research data that's not there, that could lead people to adopt decisions that are not based on any basis, and you could end up harming millions of people based on your made up research data. There is a very well-known and well-established case for a researcher that had a problem with the research data. So there was somebody who tried to build a link on based on really bad data, that he established a link between autism and vaccinations, for example. And that paper was very poorly prepared and with very, very poor data. However, till this day, a lot of people worldwide still rely on that paper, still believe in that paper, and they are refusing to vaccinate their children, which is actually bringing back diseases that have been eradicated, really, in those countries. So it's really, really, I would say this is costing not just the credibility of science in general, this is actually costing, in some cases, people's lives. Fabrication and falsification. Falsification is the, I would say the problem with the research data that people would feel like, okay, it wouldn't matter much. If you are manipulating existing research data to show something that's not there on the research data, or to omit parts of that data, that's falsification. And that's a major ethical violation that have costed people their entire careers, as well as affecting the entire credibility of scientific research. So these are really, really important parts. And the third part is which we are going to be discussing on this section, is that plagiarism part. And the general definition of plagiarism is actually taking other people's work and miscrediting that kind of work. And it has very different forms, but I'll be mentioning some of those. So it's basically the most common type of misconduct when it comes to publishing. And this is where an author deliberately, and that's the worst kind of plagiarism, or indeliberately, by mistake, if they use other people's work without permission, credit, or acknowledgement. That's, whether you're doing this intentionally or not, it still counts as plagiarism. And it takes very different forms, starting with literal copy and paste, to just even paraphrasing is plagiarism. Even summarizing other people's work is still plagiarism, as long as it's not linked with others people permissions, credit, or acknowledgement. And the thing is, what can you plagiarize? So you could plagiarize the exact text, copy and paste, and that's like the most clearly detected and the easiest detected form of plagiarism. Okay, you don't you are not allowed to use other people's words and phrases. You're not allowed to use other people's data unless you are referring to their data. You're making proper credit for this. But using other people's words and phrases, you cannot pass other people's words, phrases, or even sentence structure as your own. The ideas and concepts is clearly the worst kind of plagiarism you can do. Even if you are writing it in your own voice, you have no right to claim other people's thoughts, ideas, concepts, and pass it as your own. This is the most heinous type of plagiarism, is to attribute the original ideas or the original data of other people to your work. Maybe using other people's phrases or sentence structure could even be a lesser form of plagiarism, but definitely if you're using somebody else's fruit of the mind, ideas and concepts, this is where it gets really, really unethical, and this is where the scientific community takes very harsh actions on publications mentioned like this. Let me tell you that in advanced countries, an undergraduate plagiarizing could be expelled. Okay, we are still we are still suffering with plagiarism even within our academic ranks, and this is really something that we find all across the emerging countries, including my own as well. And that's important that we start working on this together. So there is actually a link for a plagiarism fact sheet that was prepared by Elsevier. You can find the link for it here. And there are most common forms of plagiarism are literal copying. So this is copy and paste, reproducing a work word for word, being a copycat. So whether you're using an entire paragraph or a sentence or even a part of a sentence, you are not allowed to use other people's words unless you are saying that those are the exact words of someone else and you're acknowledging who the someone else is. And this is something that's very rare in hard sciences. It might be more okay to use direct quotations in the context of social sciences, for example. So it's only allowed if you're putting entire quotations and you're putting clear remarks in your writing that what's going to come next between the quotation marks is said by someone else, and you are using this on very need basis. You're using this if the entire phrase, if the exact phrasing of the text is actually needed to justify your, is needed to for the idea you are trying to express. The second form of plagiarism is paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is plagiarism. Reproducing someone else's ideas with your own words is actually a transgression to other people's ideas. The only proper way to do paraphrasing is to clearly state that the upcoming idea was created by someone else, and you are only allowed to use their idea if you are using your own words and your own sentence structures for them, and you are acknowledging the original source for that idea. That also implies that you are not, I cannot say that, for example, that Dr. Ikiki said something and I'm explaining his words into my own voice, but I'm actually giving a very different meaning to what Dr. Ikiki did. That's also unethical. So you cannot plagiarize other people's idea, and you cannot misrepresent other people's ideas as well. So the key point here is always give credit when you're using someone else's work. In-text citation, integration, and reference list. So let's do something a little bit of a funny exercise, if I might say. And to get to it, just so this is a bit of a repetition for how do you work with support, you work with other people's ideas. So direct quotations can only be used in between quotation marks. Paraphrasing means an idea from a single source in your own words and your own voice with the proper attribution. Summarizing means getting ideas from multiple sources and amalgamating the ideas from multiple sources into just one idea being expressed by yourself. This is where those ideas are being amalgamated together, so you cannot are being summarized all together, mixed together, so you cannot you can only list the number of references, all the references that helped you reach that summary, but you cannot really trace if that summary which part of it is related to which reference, but the entire collective of the ideas you are representing can be attributed to multiple references at once. In all cases, properly reference. And don't change the intended meaning. So this is the funny exercise I was telling you about. So this is a sentence in a fictional original text. Okay, so that's a little bit of a typo. So we observed statistically significant improvement in student grades as the percentage of canceled classes increased in all 3 controlled studies. So that's something that looks like something that is from a paper. That's something completely fictitious, because what that sentence is saying is that what you can see here, what this sentence is trying to say is that canceling classes improved student grades, which is really not there, but I would say students wish at times. So as I would mention this part, or if I'm using data from this fictitious sentence into something I'm writing, what I'm going to be saying is that a study by Pan et al. Showed that canceling classes improves student grades. And between brackets, Pan et al., 2017. What did I do here? I did actually 3 things. The first thing of which, and just before I move forward, I have at the end of my text, I have to add this paper that I found those original text in bold here from, and I'll have to list that paper. Okay, so what did I do here? The first part here, a study by Pan et al. Showed that this is where I'm giving an introduction to my reader that the idea that's coming next is paraphrased from someone else. Okay, and I'm actually giving credit within the text to the author and his co-authors as well. So a study showed that that's integrating the source, that's putting a little bit of an announcement that's what coming next is someone else's work. So I'm clearly not misattributing the work to myself. The next part is actually a summary I built in my own words, in my own voice, based on the text I found there. The first thing I did do here is that I did not copy and paste the original text and start working to modify it. That approach almost always fails. Okay, there are always fragments of the original sentence structure that are there, and you are actually taking other people's style and voice and sentence structure into your own. Always start your paraphrase with a clear text that you're writing out of your head. So you're looking at the original text and you're writing it completely from scratch. Don't start by modifying text. It never works. Okay, and by the end, I have to put the in-text citation, and it should be related to the reference I have to the reference in the list of references below. That part in red is where Mendeley can help me. The part in blue is based on your writing skills, as well as the part in purple that you can see on screen. And so the parts in red is where Mendeley can help me. There are very different styles to expressing the in-text citation as well as the list and reference. So the sections in red have very different styles. For example, APA, Harvard, Chicago, MLA, Nature, many styles of references. And this is the part that can be done automatically using a reference manager like Mendeley. Mendeley will adjust based on the style how your in-text citation part should look like and how it should look like in the list of references, and it can be automatically updated if you change that style from one to the other. Another style, so some styles use the in-text citation part as in author name and year. Another use the list of references, and it can be changed accordingly as well based on the style you are using, as I said. So what should you do then? You should always write fresh. Don't copy and paste and then paraphrase. Always start with a fresh text if you are paraphrasing. Okay, never copy and paste. If you are copying and pasting, you'll never get to a plagiarism-free text. Do not use things you do not fully understand. You'll probably end up misrepresenting the idea. And if you are attributing a misrepresented idea to an author, that's bad, really bad. Keep track of the sources you are using while you're reading. So while you are reading, it's good if you are taking notes while you are reading, and you are, so for example, I would say establish a text. I would say establish always a Word file. Sorry. I would always say establish a text where you are adding all those sources and all the ideas as you are reading. Okay, and keep it with proper referencing, because it will help you when you go back to writing your introduction in your paper. Direct quotations should only be used when the word for word text has significance. So for example, if you are mentioning a specific, for example, law article, for example, okay, the exact phrasing matters, and this is an example of a very needed exception where you need the exact phrasing of a sentence. If you are quoting whole scripture, or if you are quoting a direct quotation that has a significance that was said by a historical figure, for example. So most of the examples you'll see actually come from social sciences. Really, this is very rare to see when it comes to hard sciences as well. Compare your paraphrasing with the source to make sure you retain the intended meaning. So after you finish the paraphrasing, just do a double check. Do the paraphrased part and the original part say the same thing or not? And make sure to reference the source accordingly. Always cite, never copy and paste. And there is one thing we need to visit here that's related to similarity tools and plagiarism checkers. So a plagiarism checker is a computerized tool that compares text. Okay, and so what it does is that it compares the text of your manuscript with all the documents in a very large repository. So some of those repositories are very large. They contain full text from multiple publishers, from multiple schools. So some of those plagiarism checkers can detect plagiarism against a student in another university in any place on the world. So, but they are based basically on computerized adoption of text similarity. And they are getting much smarter, is that even if you are copying and pasting and you start changing specific words, they are able to tell if there are only minor changes, or if there are only word changes within a sentence that looks the same, even if it's using different vocabulary. Okay, and that's why I'm telling you, copying and pasting always ends up getting detected by plagiarism checkers. So, however, the similarity as presented by the plagiarism checker should not be the final judge to whether a text is being plagiarized or not. So, for example, if I'm doing very, very, very proper paraphrasing that looks nothing like the original text. So you've seen an example for one sentence, for example. If I did the paraphrasing and I'm not putting the proper citation, the similarity tool will not be able to detect it. However, that's plain right theft. If you are presenting ideas and you're not saying who the ideas came from, you are attributing them to yourselves and you are stealing other people's ideas. You will not be caught by plagiarism software, but any expert in the field should be able to tell if that idea was already presented by someone else, and that's probably the worst kind of plagiarism you could do. Okay, is to misattribute other people's ideas to pass it off as your own idea. So what I mean is somebody could have a very low percentage on their work, but they are actually have plagiarized other people's work. Okay, in other cases, on the opposite case, as well, you can actually go through for example, if you are writing a methods part and you are explaining standard tools that everyone else uses to run this experiment, but you have to affirm how you created that tool. So there is a lot of text similarity because you're using the similar equipment that someone else used, because you have the same vendor, for example, or using the same reagents, for example, or you are using the same methodology that's quite standard in your field. If there are some text similarities happening there, you're not copying and pasting other people's idea, but you are expressing them from scratch, but they happen to be a process using technical terms that everyone else uses. That should be okay. Even a similarity tool, if it flags them out, a human assessor should be able to judge that this should be okay, because you cannot invent new names for reagents, for example, or new names for devices. And let me tell you this, if you never copy and paste and you're writing everything from scratch in your own words, you should not worry about the text similarity. The text similarity tool should be benchmarked against your practice. If you are writing your ideas from scratch in your own words and you are properly citing work, you're probably citing, you are rightfully citing the author's ideas, and you are integrating the source, you're putting markers on every idea that you're integrating from someone else, is that this is someone else's work. You should not worry about the plagiarism checker. You should not worry about the percentage. In fact, if you're doing everything properly with the proper practice, that plagiarism checker should be benchmarked against you, not the other way around. One thing, if you are, and a very clear note, because it is one of the very common problems I've heard in many of these presentations. Sometimes people are very worried about how their work would look on a plagiarism checker, so they end up running their work like a pre-trial for yourself on a plagiarism checker. Make sure that if you're running an internal trial that's just for your own self-reference, that the plagiarism checker does not keep a copy of your work in their repository, because once you have submitted the work to the journal or to your school, if you're writing a thesis, for example, it will elsewhere in the repository, even if that elsewhere is your own work as well. It will cause just a managerial hassle. Usually it should be cleared out, but just save yourself that kind of hassle. If you are using a plagiarism checker for a self-check, make sure it's not kept in a repository. However, if you are a professor and you are collecting work from students, make sure that the work officially submitted by students is kept on the plagiarism checker repository as well. The golden rule for good similarity reports is copy and paste should never be used. Okay. Don't copy and paste and say, I will modify it for paraphrasing. That's not how paraphrasing works, and it never works that way. So that's a little bit of another exercise that we have here. I will launch a poll for that similar, for that exercise you can see on screen. So these are the questions you have. So these are 4 questions for 4 cases, and please let me know if these cases are okay or not. The same questions you can see on screen are available on the pop-up poll that you see on your screens. So please just click yes or no. I'll be waiting for maybe a minute before we move to the last section of our training today. one question I'd like to answer. So if I'm writing my ideas from scratch in different articles and journals, will there be text similarity from the different journals and end up as self-plagiarism? So if you are writing it from scratch every time, it will remain your own voice, and that's something you totally own, and how your style looks like. So it should be okay. But if you are recycling the same text over and over again, so if you're using it for copy and paste, that's definitely frowned upon. However, text similarity between the different things you write, because you have a natural tendency to explain things similarly, that should be okay. And that's why self-plagiarism is a very gray area, and it depends on the proper assessment of a human, whether they are the editor or the reviewers themselves. But if it's word for word, then definitely no, you cannot do this in different papers. But if there are textual similarity between your own work in different places, that's a little bit of a gray area, depends on a case-by-case assessment. So we have reached 74% participation on our poll, and there are very close ties on some of the questions, and I have to admit that both people can be right at times. So for the first question, because some of the questions are a bit tricky, so you use the concept that was mentioned in a published paper, but you paraphrased it. So you explained it in your own words, and you submitted it to a plagiarism software or a similarity tool, and it says it has an 8%. Does this mean that everything is okay? It actually does not. There is a very important element we did not question here. Did I properly reference or cite the sources I paraphrased the ideas from or not? If I did not, even if the similarity says, if the plagiarism software says everything is okay, it definitely is not. So it depends really on whether or not you have properly cited as well. Remember, as I told you, properly paraphrasing and not mentioning the source, meaning that you are attributing those ideas to yourself. That's not something that is allowed. So I understand it's a very tricky question. Okay, so I understand where the very close tie comes from, and I would say I understand why a lot of people, because that was literally a part that was just left out in that sentence. A very important paragraph in a paper discussed an idea that needs to be included in your essay instead of copying and pasting directly to your document. You are using an auto-paraphrasing tool to fix the paragraph for your essay, and you cited it properly. Is this okay? Yes or no? I would say definitely no, for one reason. Auto-paraphrasing tools usually end up messing the text of your paragraph. If you have used something that is copy and paste, one of the things, or how auto-paraphrasing tools usually work, is that auto-paraphrasing tools usually start changing different words, and they are getting words that are equivalent or from a thesaurus relevant to those words as well. And there are two problems really related to this. One of the things is that you're using a sentence structure that's not yours. Okay, and the other thing is, if you are using that auto-paraphrasing tools, there is usually a very great risk that your text will end up being not understandable to anyone. Because if a technical term is being changed, that's something that's really bad, because nobody will start to understand it. And what's really not okay with it is that the quality of the work you are putting is done by a machine. The quality of the text you're writing is done by a machine. It ends up being much lesser quality than what you've worked on yourself. So just getting chunks of text and asking a software to paraphrase them ends up with very poor quality for your manuscript, and also risks retaining someone else's voice and sentence structure that you're not really entitled to use. So I would definitely advise not to use auto-paraphrasing tools. Can you cite a report that you prepared for another subject in your research, in your new research or not? Yes, that is something that is a common practice. So you can always build on your own previous work as long as you are properly citing yourself. Okay. And self citations are a gray area, because if you're using them on need basis, then it's totally okay. But if you are excessively citing your own work just to skewer or to play the metrics or your own H index or that kind of thing, then it's definitely an unethical practice as well. You refer to a legislative article that's important to your article, so you copy and paste it, put it in quotation marks and cite it. Is it okay? It should be okay as long as there is a need to mention the exact wording for that legislative article, which is usually related to when it comes to matters of law, is that the exact wording and phrasing usually have important significance as well. So moving on to the final part is how to use Mendeley to cite references. And as I told you, you have to build the in-text citation and the list of references according to different styles. You can always type them by hand, but then if you have to make any small modification on the references, if you're using a numbered list, then you have to revise the entire list. Or if you are changing the style because your paper was not accepted in one journal and you're going to another journal, and then you have to change the entire styling, the reference styling method, then it would take you a lot of work to redo that again. There are ways that are built to make this a much simpler and much more pleasant experience. So, and that part shouldn't take us much long time because Mendeley is really that easy to use. You have a plugin that's built on your word processor. So whether it's Microsoft Word or an open source word processor like LibreOffice, for example, you should be able to just do these with a couple of clicks. While you are writing, you look up the library you've built, you choose the reference, and then it automatically generates the in-text citation, and you insert the bibliography at the end and manage which style you're using. So let's see that a little bit into practice. So Mendeley in general is is two things at the same time. Mendeley is both a reference manager and an academic social network. And it can help you organize your research, collaborate with others online, and discover the latest research. So why Mendeley is a nice thing? It can help you build your own library, organize your documents, collaborate them, and by sharing this library and sharing the comments you make on the papers while you read them with your team. And you can create private groups as well as create public groups just to discuss different ideas. In private groups, you can share full text. In public groups, you can't. You can discover statistics and recommendations. You can stay up to date. And you can also use Mendeley to store your library as well as the research data you're doing and have a backup on a cloud online. And you can also use Mendeley to leverage your data, which is something I'm going to revisit shortly, is that you can use Mendeley to store the research data you have actually produced and make it private, only seen by you, or shared only amongst your collaborators or your research team. You can also use Mendeley to publish the research data you have discovered and make it accessible online. And we found that research data, raw research data, usually attract a lot of citations just as well. Okay, because you can generate a DOI link for them, for example. Part of the academic social network is that there are career opportunities posted on Mendeley that usually target people with an academic background. And you can also look for funding for your research as well. So how do I use Mendeley? It comes with an academic software, and it works on Windows, Macintosh, Linux, mobile. It works with major web browsers, and it has its own social media capacities, as well as the data repository and the careers and funding parts. So let's just get to the practical section. You can use Mendeley for free. You can create an account for Mendeley for free, and even the free accounts on Mendeley, they have a lot of options, a lot of features that are even superior to maybe other reference managers that are paid for. So to get started, you just need to visit mendeley.com and click on the create free account. You download and install the desktop application, and you install the Mendeley plugin for Microsoft Word. And you can also install the plugin for the browser. You have personalized suggestions coming up because Mendeley tries to analyze your own library as well as it can link to your Scopus profile, and it can suggest papers to read or people to connect to based on AI or artificial intelligence. The library and the research data you have stored with Mendeley are accessible from everywhere because it's cloud-based. Mendeley gives you more storage than any other free reference manager you have. It gives you 2 gigabytes of free cloud storage for your library as well as your research data, and that's for free. You can expand these with either personal or institutional subscriptions to expand beyond the 2 gigabytes, as well as some extra features. However, 2 gigabytes should be very well posed to most of your libraries. Imagine 2 gigabytes of just PDFs, and it leaves you very good room to also start storing your cloud-based to either store your own personal data, share them with your research team, or publish them publicly for other people to see the research data you are producing. You can build groups, as I said, private and public groups. And so you can use the same library to write the same paper together, for example, or to share comments on while you are reading. A lot of advisors do this, for example, with their graduate students, is that, okay, they tell them, okay, as your initial reading in this matter, so before we go any further discussions, you need to read those 30 most important papers in the field or very foundational papers, and they start sharing those 30 papers, and while the student reads them, they can put comments on the PDFs from within Mendeley that will be seen by the advisor, where they can comment back on those. Mendeley also has a web importer. So that's a plugin that builds into your browser, and it's a very, very interesting way of finding out the PDFs, and not only getting the citation data, you can also fetch PDFs, full text PDFs using the web importer. And the citation plugin is of the major interest for us now because it integrates with our writing. So also, you can use Mendeley to search for papers. So from mendeley.com, you can run a paper search, and it will look across all Mendeley libraries of all users worldwide to look for those papers. You can find a paper that's only in citation data and add it to your library, or sometimes if the paper has open access privileges, you can also fetch the PDF as well. And if you are using any website from any publisher, if you have the plugin installed on your browser, if you click on it, it will identify all the papers being mentioned on that web page, whether that it's a publisher web page or a search engine or anything. It will identify any paper mentioned on that web page. So this is an example from ScienceDirect, but it works just the same for any other paper from any other publisher. And it will start using your own browser connection to find out if your connection, for example, if you're connected to the university IP or you have activated remote access with multiple publishers, it will determine if your internet connection gives you access to that paper or not. So what Mendeley will use your own internet connection to see if you have browsed or you have visited that paper, you would have gotten access to it or not. And that's a very interesting way, because sometimes it looks throughout the entire internet for open access versions or green open access versions of the internet. If it can reach out a PDF that's related to that paper, it can be fetched as well to your library. So your library can contain only research, only bibliographic data, like what's the title, what's the author, what's the journal that you will use to build your citation, and it can only handle full text PDFs as well. So let's run this a little bit practically before we conclude our session today in a demo for Mendeley. So I'm gonna visit mendeley.com, and I'm opening incognito because I don't want it to open to my signed in account. So visiting Mendeley for the first time, this is how it should look like. Sign in, create account, or download. So these are the options. the first thing you need to do is to create a free account. And remember that the same account used on Elsevier solutions is the same. So you can use the same account for Mendeley, for ScienceDirect, for Scopus, and for Researcher Academy, and any other Elsevier solution. It's one username, one password for everything, okay? So you can access your library everywhere, citing, career funding, and you can download it for different devices, laptop, tablets, and mobiles. And what I will need to do is to create a free account. Creating a free account on Mendeley is very similar to, it's very similar to what you'd expect on Scopus, for example. You will type in an email. The first thing that Elsevier would do is look if that email has been ever used on any Elsevier solution, including the submission portals, the editorial manager. If you have submitted a paper on Elsevier, same username and password for anything. So if this email was previously used to create an account, what it will ask you next is to provide the password for that account. Also, if that email has never been used before, and let me type any gibberish, for example, at anygibberish.com, and that email has never been used before on ScienceDirect, it will ask you then to put a first name, last name, and password. There are some restrictions on the password, minimum of 8 letters, 1 number, mix of lowercase and uppercase, and 1 symbol, and you can stay signed in and register. Once you've registered, you'll be sent a confirmation email to make sure that the email you used is an actually working email, not just like the one I used. For Mendeley, you can use any email, but since you are using your account across multiple platforms, it's better to connect to your institutional email to activate remote access on ScienceDirect and Scopus as well. So also from that very landing page on Mendeley, you can find here that you can download Mendeley. So you can download the Mendeley desktop. There is a beta version for the new Mendeley Reference Manager. I think it's going on alpha. Some people can start downloading the alpha version for the new software. But for now, since we're still transitioning, I'm going to be covering the original Mendeley desktop. And you can also download the plugin for the Mendeley importer and the citation plugin. So you will need to download the Mendeley desktop, and let me show you how the Mendeley desktop software will look like. So it actually needs an update. So while it opens up, let me give you a little bit of a sneak peek of how a signed in account would look like. Oh, I'm not signed in. So now I am. And so this is my account on Mendeley. As you can see here, there are suggestions for expanding my own network. So these are people it's based on my library, suggesting I connect to those people. It's trying to link to my Scopus profile, and there is the news feed I will see from the people I'm following. This is where an online version of my library is at. This is where I get suggestions for papers, and I get suggestions for people to follow. This is where I manage my groups, the groups I'm member of, or the groups I own, whether they are public or private. Remember that sharing full text is only allowed on private groups. Private groups have a limitation of 25 people. Okay. And you can create up to 5 different groups. Data sets. So this is where I can manage my personal data sets or data sets I'm working with collaborators. And this is where also I can use data sets from other publishers. This is where I can also make my self-publish my own data sets as well. This is the careers portal where I can look for job opportunities that are targeted for people of academic background. And this is where I can look up funding opportunities as well. So what we are going to be using now is that this same library that's online, it's also available on my Mendeley desktop, as you can see here. And how do I build the references on this? So you can see that some of the references I have here are some of the references here are not linked to a full text because I only have the citation data for them. I did not add the full text on Mendeley because, for example, I read them in hard copy, for example. Some others have full text related to them. So, for example, this paper here. So that's the full text of a paper because this was a scanned version, for example, that I did scan at the library, or it could be an official PDF from a publisher, for example, like this one. This is actually a dissertation. It works just the same, and so forth. So there are multiple ways I can use to build that library. So if I have a PDF on my computer, I can drag and drop that PDF on Mendeley desktop. But this is not what I would recommend as a first option for one reason, because a PDF, how a PDF is being prepared depends on the publisher itself, and it depends on what's called the metadata for that paper. Metadata means that the PDF has to have an enhancement to have the title, bibliographic data, and maybe the abstract machine readable. Okay, if the publisher has not prepared the PDF well, you will see problems with the metadata here. So let me show you a little bit of an example here. Just a second. I've had a couple of those uncorrected. I'm not really scrolling, am I? So for example, check this one. It's actually not reading anything properly, but there is a PDF here, because this PDF here is actually has not been enhanced with the proper metadata. So it's not actually reading the metadata. What I have to do is I have to correct them myself here. I have to type in the title, the authors, the journal, the year, and I have to type them by hand. Okay, this is a one that has metadata, but as you can see here, there is poor formatting on the metadata here when I drag and drop that PDF. So that kind of happens. If it happens, you have to correct it yourself. But there is a more efficient way to build that library, because that paper exists online from the publisher who has actually published it. Okay, so what I will do is that if I'm looking up a paper from any publisher, and let me use something that's even not related to Elsevier, for example. So I've had a paper I was reading a while back. So for example, that's a paper that does not even come from Elsevier. Okay, it comes from another publisher, very prestigious publisher as well, Nature. So that's another paper I found online, and that paper happens, I think it's free access, so the full text is accessible as well. If I want to cite that paper and I installed the citation, browser plugin, so this is Mendeley Web Importer. If I click on the web importer, it will ask me to sign in, and because I'm already signed in to Mendeley, it shouldn't take long. So what you're trying here is, and it's detecting I'm working from home, not an institution. So it's remind me if I have remote access options I can use with different publishers, that I should use them. And what Mendeley is doing now, it's trying to identify all the papers mentioned in this specific web page. So it will identify the main paper, which is antibody response to SARS-CoV-2, for example, and it's telling me I can get the PDF because the publisher has made it free access. And it's telling me there are 13 more references detected on the page. And it's telling me which my current browser connection can help me fetch the PDF as well. As you can see, the majority of those I can get the PDF, but this paper, for example, it's still checking if it can be accessed. Usually, if you're working on COVID-related matters, it's usually always accessible because the majority of publishers worldwide have made all the research related to COVID-19 freely accessible, and this has been happening across multiple publishers. So where did these references were mentioned? Probably in the list of references for this paper, or as suggested papers on the same web page. If a paper is mentioned anywhere in the web page, it will be detected here. I can click which I want to attach to add to my reference list, and I can tell it to add PDFs if available. If I want to save space, then I would not click it. And adding them to Mendeley will add all those papers with one click to my Mendeley library online. From my Mendeley desktop, I can always sync to make sure that the library I have online and the library I have on my local computer are always synchronized together. This is a better option that usually yields much more accurate setup or bibliographic setup for your library. Another thing is you can always, so for example, a lot of publishers, a lot of cases, you can actually find aside this article option, and you can download the citation usually in the format of RIS file. An RIS file is a file that contains only the bibliographic data. It's usually a free file, and you can, from Mendeley desktop, you can actually import a reference from, you can actually open, you can drag and drop the RIS file, or you can add a file from, you can add a file in RIS format. So this file here, I can just open it in Mendeley and it will be added in RIS format to my library. So, but it will not have the full text. As you can see here, RIS files do not give you the full text. They are free files just to contain the citation data. So that's probably one of the benefits you can get with the web importer, because it can fetch you always the PDFs in an easy way. Also, Mendeley supports references in that use script that's not Roman letters. So for example, I have here, because my native language is Arabic, I've created a mock-up exercise where I inserted manually the data for something that uses different letters than Roman letters. So Mendeley supports non-Roman letter languages as well. So if it's Arabic, Chinese, or any different writing system that you would be using, for example, it's also supported by Mendeley. Just make sure that you have the data properly listed here to be able to sign for Mendeley to use it properly with Microsoft Word. So what did I do again? From Mendeley here, if I click on my account, on the downloads, we've mentioned the Mendeley desktop as a very important part you need to download, and the web importer, that's something else you need to download as well. The third thing is the citation plugin is the link between your Mendeley desktop as well as your Microsoft Word. And let me show you how it works. From the Mendeley desktop here, I can click on Tools, Install. I need to make sure that I've installed Microsoft Word plugin. If I've installed a Microsoft Word plugin and I go to Microsoft Word, as you can see here, if I click on the References tab, this is what I installed from Mendeley desktop. So this part here, Mendeley Citomatic, goes from Mendeley desktop. From Tools, install Microsoft Word plugin. There is also another tool that connects directly with my online library. So this one connects with my offline, with my Mendeley desktop. This one here, Mendeley's site, I can download it from the website and it connects directly to my online library. Okay, if I properly make sure that I'm syncing my library or clicking on here, I'll make sure that both plugins work the same. So this requires an internet connection to fetch the reference from the online library. This works offline. Usually I personally use this one. So let's say I'm putting a reference like we did in the earlier exercise. So if you can remember on the slides here, we had an example earlier where we were writing the in-text integration. So I would say, for example, multiple research done on the case showed that's the in-text integration part, and then I'll be writing my own paraphrasing that that source, for example, COV2 can be transmitted by can survive, for example. So that's something based on a summary. I'm doing a summary. I'm using a summary because I'm combining multiple sources into a single conclusion or a single idea. Can survive on surfaces, and I need to back this idea by the research it came from. So I would click on insert citation. It's a very light snippet that you'd see. I can search my library by author, title, or year. Okay, and since I'm not a healthcare professional, actually the library I've built up myself would not really support that claim, but just for the sake of example here, I can look up author if I remember an author name in my library. For example, this guy here, as you can see, I'm getting a preview for the papers with this name mentioned in the author. So for example, this one. And I can add an additional reference as well. And I remember there was a paper that was published in 2020. Yes, so I can search by year as well. I can also search either my library or I can search Researcher Academy. Just let's stick to my library for now. Yes, that's the one. I will also add in another reference. I can search by author name, by title of the paper. So there was a title that was talking about, say, for example, this one. So I can also search by title. If I click on OK, all those references will be mentioned here according to the style that's set here. Okay, and I'm adding, however, novel research by a researcher and I need to remember their name because I can't really remember well. So there is always an option to see your entire library. Yes, and I can actually scroll through my entire library, do a search in it, or even if I'm using tags to look upon the tags. So one of the tags I'd like to use, this is a part that's related to transmissibility, for example. So I can use different tags that help me find papers in my library faster. Sometimes if you see it, you remember it. So yes, that was the paper by Wayne Johnson. Regardless, it's on a very different field. If I click on it, because I've called Mendeley from within Microsoft Word, I can now see this button, Cite. This only works if you've opened your Mendeley desktop while you are citing a reference. And you can see here a novel search by, for example, Johnson shows that this showed irregularities, for example, related to whatever I'm gonna mention a little bit later on. And by the end of my text, remember here, I'm not using copy and pasting. I'm actually relying on what I read and what I'm expressing completely in my own ideas. What I will need to do at the end is just click on insert bibliography. And that's it. So I'll just type in here references or bibliography, for example. And that's completely it. That's all I need to do. If I want to change the style, it can happen with a click of a button. So I'm changing it to IEEE style. And now it's in IEEE style. IEEE style combine multiple references, for example, with a dash here. Another style like maybe Nature, for example, uses a different format for the in-text as well as the bibliography here. Model MLA, for example, that's what MLA looks like. Okay, so are these all the list of references I need to use? Not really, because I can always go for more styles. So these are the styles I have installed. If there are updates, I'll be told that there are updates, so I can actually update the reference list I have. I can get more styles. So for example, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, so I'll look for the American Society of Mechanical Engineers reference style, and I can install it, for example. I can also look for if also I have a style that I cannot find here, and that's a very rare case usually, there is part of the Mendeley website called csl.mendeley.com. If you have a sample of what that reference should look like, you can search by either the name of the style or search by example and download it. And one of my, on one of the trainings I've given before, I found on somebody who was asking me if I am, their advisor was asking them to use a style very similar to Vancouver, but it told me it looks just like the Vancouver style, but it's using superscripts instead of brackets for numbers. And she told me, can Mendeley help me do those references, or because it's a customized style, I have to do them by hand? Actually, Mendeley can help you. There are two ways. If you have written an example, if you have a written example of what that style looks like, you can go for search by example here. And what I personally did, I did two ways. So one approach is that I actually went to Microsoft Word and I used the Vancouver style. I looked it up because it's already a famous style, and I used that style. Done. And sorry. Let's hope it's not. Yes, I'm using Vancouver. Actually, it's picking up the modified. Anyway, so I got this Vancouver style. I personally modified it by hand to look like the superscript that she was describing. And then I took it back and I searched for that example. And actually, it turns out that this is a very specific style to a very specific journal, the Journal of Anesthesia, for example. And because her advisor is used to publish a lot of papers, and I believe she was an associate editor at that journal, she prefers to use that style on her writing, for example. Another thing is that you can start with a well-known, and this is what I've done here really, because you can see here that when I was doing the search, there was a Vancouver and there was a Vancouver that was modified by Khaled, by me. What I can do is that I can start with a well-known style and I can edit it in the visual editor here, and I can save it on my computer to be reused later on. So you can actually build up a totally and completely new style if you want to, and you can use this if a style that you're required to use a very specific customized style for any reason that you might have. So that's another thing you can do on Mendeley as well. And also one thing I need to show you here. So let's go back to a more, so for example, for the Chicago style here, then again, I'm changing with just a click. And you can see the style and the in-text citation are changing every time with how APA, for example, here. And let's go back to something that's numbered. So IEEE again. So I can actually, if I need to remove that sentence, for example, to the very top of the paragraph, and of course I'll have to change the writing accordingly. And if I click on update or refresh here, it will actually rechange the numbering here and the numbering in the bibliography list to match that new style. So making modifications can be really easy and really quick to use as well. One thing I need to say here, and that's really, really important, is that, so for example, if you are writing if you're writing your PhD thesis and your advisor tells you, okay, that looks really nice, but maybe remove section 4.2 should become section 3.5. That's a cut and paste that should take you seconds to do. But if you are rewriting the entire reference order to match that again, it can be done with the click of a button. So please don't waste time formatting your references when this can be done really automatic, really easy, and really simple to use. Whether you're using Mendeley or you're using another reference manager, that's totally your choice, but not using a reference manager and using them by hand is a really tedious process to go through. Mendeley site works just the same as Mendeley, but it imports the references directly from the cloud as well. So that should leave us at the end of our presentation today. And I'm sorry we've gone overboard with the time here. I've left in more slides with the instructions of all the things you've seen on the demo, on Mendeley, and more on Mendeley groups, on sharing content, on having a private group with a collaboration where you can see your collaborators what they are reading and what they are commenting on, the citation plugin, the in-text citations, inserting bibliography, searching for funding opportunities, and searching for careers. For final remarks, just a few ethics pointers to conclude our discussion today. When you are submitting a paper, please submit only to one journal at a time. Multiple submissions are grave ethical violation, and they usually end up with authors doing that to be blacklisted across multiple publishers. They will know, editors will know if you are going through this. And if they don't know and you end up getting published at multiple places, then you'll probably get retracted in both papers at the same time. Getting a retraction is one of the worst things that could happen to a career, especially if it's based on an ethical violation. Because an article that is retracted, it remains online, but it has a mark for life, for as long as the internet exists, that this article was retracted because the author had an ethical violation of so and so. Ethical violations are not the only reason why retractions happen. Sometimes retractions happens because authors have found out after a paper was published that there was an honest mistake, and that's the brave and conscious thing to do, is to ask for a retraction for something that shouldn't be there out loud. But the majority of retraction happen for ethical reasons. However, the reason for the retraction is always listed online and it's forever there. If you have a related paper under a consideration at another journal, let the editor know that this paper was that you are so in general, don't go through multiple submissions. Don't have a paper that's being considered at multiple journals at the same time. If this happens, let the editor know that this paper has been under consideration, but the editor, for example, so this happens for a very specific case I have in mind. Sometimes an editor, and this happens usually with journals that are going through crises, I would say, is that a paper has been under review for a very, very long time, for 2 years, for example, and the editor is no longer replying, and you've told them very strictly and very clearly that, please, I'm withdrawing my submission. Please no longer consider this because you are not managing your journal properly. Okay, so if you have made that point, but you're still not heard a confirmation from the editor, that paper is still considered under consideration at another journal because the editor did not confirm your withdrawal. Sometimes this happens because the journal has crumbled and they no longer have editors who are active, or that journal had changed its publisher, whatever the reason. Such is the case and you've clearly withdrawn that and you have not received the confirmation, please let the new editor you will submit the paper to know that so and so happened, and you have clearly taken action to withdraw that submission before you submit it. But keep your editor in the loop on very specific cases that has led to such situations. Very, very important to prepare a figure. Always stay aligned with your advisor. If you're doing any manipulation or removal of data, that's very frowned upon. Okay, you need to do this on very tight basis, and you need to clearly state in your text that you've used a specific filter for your data, or you have removed data for specific reasons, and you have to have a very strong argument why you would manipulate or remove data from your results as well. It has to be clearly transparent in your text. Whenever you are in doubt about anything ethical, the proper solution is be transparent about it to your editor. If you have a conflict of interest, if your research has been funded by a specific individual, or that research affects something you have a commercial interest for because you have it as a startup, or you are a shareholder in, you're doing a research about smoking, for example, and you have bought stocks at a smoking company, for example. If there is any way that research could create a conflict of interest or affect your own personal interest, you should clearly declare it as part of your research. Include your co-authors in your manuscript. Do not give gift authorships. Do not give gift authorships. People who has not worked should not be listed as co-authors. People who have contributed with minor contribution that does not affect the science of the paper should only be in the acknowledgements. And people who have contributed to the actual science in the paper should be listed as a co-author and should not be kept as ghosts, not mentioned. The conflict of interest also applies to the reviewers, and always keep yourself educated about plagiarism and self-plagiarism. We have courses, specifically more detailed courses on plagiarism on Researcher Academy that I will share with you. I would also strongly recommend that you visit the ethics toolkit. If you discover discover an error in your paper that was published, the honest thing to do is that you contact the editor to either have it corrected by an erratum or a corrigendum, or to have it, or sometimes if the entire paper was completely based on an error, okay, the honest thing would be actually to do, and the brave thing to do would to ask for the retraction for it by yourself. We've had Nobel laureates retracting their own papers when they found critical mistakes with the paper that cannot just be corrected with a correction. All the data about your methods and the raw data should be reported. Good scientific practice is critical in all daily activities in your lab. Always maintain your lab notebook, your lab meetings, your records, because if someone 10 years later from now is challenging that this is not, that this data is in any way falsified or fabricated, always keep the raw data to go back to whenever there is a conflict. And always know and trust your collaborators. There was a very big scandal in last May where a very prestigious cardiosurgeon published a very influential paper on COVID, but one of the collaborators they had, he didn't know properly well, and they used tons of fabricated data, and there was a huge scandal. So make sure you can trust your collaborators very well when you're working, because if a collaborator of yours have done an ethical misconduct, and the paper got retracted, it affects everyone who was part of that project. Okay, it mainly affects the one with the ethical violation, but it also casts shadows upon all the collaborators of the unethical author or co-author they had. That's another example I'm leaving for you. These are just a few points. Here, I would need to just going as a summary for what we discussed today. As I told you, there are courses available online on plagiarism on Researcher Academy. Actually, there is a new course that was just added. You can also find it there. So there are actually other one than this, but this is a very good start. If you're writing a review paper, I know I just skimmed through review papers. I focused more on original paper. We have a separate training for running review articles that's certified by Elsevier, Researcher Academy, and sort of systematic reviews if you're working on health sciences, for example, or life sciences. These are important as well. Few extra links. So we have had a coronavirus information center. As long as this coronavirus information center is online, all our articles on COVID-19 or anything related to coronaviruses will remain free access. This was built when the coronavirus was just a thing or an epidemic in China. So it has a Chinese portal, but it has information on clinical information, public health, patient resources, research and drug discovery. This is totally for free and it's continuously updated. It's one page stop and you can always keep on what's new, and it's just on one page that's continuously updated. There is also the coronavirus research resource directory. So this combines all the resources based on who the users are. Healthcare providers have their own portal, academic researchers, healthcare educators and students, R&D professionals and engineers working on, for example, medical devices or so forth, media, librarians. Last thing is, and there is a healthcare hub. So if you are a healthcare professional, we have all the resources that we have that can help you. Toolkits, for example, guidelines and so forth, information on clinical trials on elsevier.health. Last thing is that if you need access to any solution that will, if you're working on COVID-related research and you need access to solutions by Elsevier that are not currently being provided by your university, you can ask for individual access for free till mid-October. Just go to this website here, the Coronavirus Research Hub, and fill in a form, an application request of why this solution would help with your research on COVID-19. The applications are reviewed and you could be granted access to Elsevier solutions that you don't have access to. So if you're working on life sciences, on clinical research, if you're part of a university or a government, or you're a data scientist who's using training sets and machine learning tools, for example, you can get free access on that link there. Just remember, on Researcher Academy, you can download your certificate. I'll show you the link now before we conclude our presentation today. And maybe if we have time, Dr. Okiki will let me know if we can address any of the questions being asked. This is our Facebook page, Elsevier Africa, where you can follow up on our news. And this is our Facebook group, Elsevier community. This is a two-way group, so you can make your own posts, we can make your own posts, we can start discussions together. So it works alongside the Elsevier Africa Facebook page, Elsevier community, just one word here, or you can just search for Elsevier community. And there is a channel on YouTube where we post recordings of our previous webinars. And we will be communicating with you how we will publish the recording for this specific webinar. Dr. Okiki, before we show the link for the certificates, and which is the last slide on my deck, are there any questions we need to address?
Yeah, I'm coming. Okay. Yeah, we have about, thank you, Mr. Khaled, for that wonderful presentation. It has been a refreshing time and a total engineering of our mind in terms of research. Yeah, we have about now 119 questions. Some I've already answered by testing the individual asked questions. But we have some issue that the question that border on plagiarism. And I noted three that I want you to respond quickly. Is the question, the first question says, if I write something somebody else already wrote, but I did not know they wrote or the knowledge exists, is that still plagiarism? Did you get the question?
Yeah, so there are cases. So if we are saying that if you go through a misconduct committee and like getting a punishment for it, if you can prove that this is an honest mistake, it's still a mistake, definitely. And this is why you need to do your due diligence on your literature discovery before you repeat someone else's work. So the thing is, usually reviewers who are very well trained on the literature, they will be able, if you're submitting something, if you have independently done someone else's work and you're repeating someone else's work, the reviewers will call you out on this and tell you this is not original research because this has been done before. Okay, so usually it should not be flagged as plagiarism because similarity detectors would not suggest it, for example, but reviewers will be able to tell if this is not original. So that should be an honest mistake to happen, and it could be very clearly alleviated by doing the proper literature review before we go into doing our own research and our own writing. But sometimes, also I have to be very clear on this, sometimes multiple research groups working on the same thing can reach the same conclusions at the same time. Someone else beat you to it, you should keep an alert, and this is part of our training, for example, on Scopus, is how to set up alerts to know the new papers coming into your field. But if somebody beat you to it, then you no longer can publish a replication of someone else's work. Although it's not a replication, you've reached it independently as well. I hope this answers.
Yeah, the second question is that the persons want to know that you should also be brief or comment about fair use. That was never discussed when you were talking. You want to know what is fair use when actually you are citing or using somebody's intellectual products.
Okay, so usually how it goes on in academia or on research literature, if it's available online, you are free to refer to it because research works in a very, but it builds on one another. So you can always refer to someone else's ideas as long as you give proper referencing to them because it's part of the entire discussion. However, there are few things that are not part of your intellectual property. You cannot claim, you cannot reuse someone else's text except if it's a direct quotation in the smallest amount needed. Okay, that's on very tight basis, but you cannot just copy entire paragraphs and just put quotation marks. There is no justification for this whatsoever. You can never use someone else's figures and tables without their explicit permission. So if someone had a figure and you wanted to use that figure in your own publication, you have to get permission from whoever holds the copyright. Some cases the copyright is held by the author. Sometimes the copyrights are held by the journal itself. Sometimes in both cases, both can have very clear instructions having it under, for example, a Creative Commons license. So for example, some people like to publish their paper under a share alike license, for example. A share alike license means that you have to use that figure in something that will have the same license as the original text, for example. Some people will say, okay, so you can reuse, have a standard license, Creative Commons non-commercial license, which tells you you can use this figure as is, as long as it's not for commercial license. So the fair use here really depends on the licensing process for using other people's content, whether it's videos, whether it's figures, and whether it's the paper itself, illustration materials, PowerPoints, codes, and so forth.
This question here is a little bit, can I say, an accusation now? That the question, this is what the question is. It seems Elsevier is not patient with third world authors. And that most of the time, manuscripts are being rejected. And what can you say to that? This is an accusation, and I don't want you to clear it. That is the perception of a majority anyway, that Elsevier is not patient, and also they delay manuscript for long, and after prolonged delay, they eventually reject the work, especially when it's coming from third world nation.
Okay, so as personally somebody who comes from an academic background, and I live in a third world country, which with slightly lesser economy, size of economy than Nigeria. So I've been on both sides of this discussion really at times. So just let me review a little bit of how journals work in general. So there are two types of editors you would expect for a journal. One kind of editors are professional editors. Professional editors, they only work for the most premium journals that Elsevier or any publisher has. And professional editors, they do nothing but editing, and they work from 9 to 5, just editing journals, just receiving manuscripts. They do nothing else. However, the majority of journals are operated completely by academics. And academics are university professors from all over the world. So these are professors who have their own work, their own classes, their own research, their own grants, their own administrative tasks at their university. And alongside all those tasks, they do the editorial role. And usually for bigger journals, there is a structure within the editor roles, from associate editor to editor-in-chief, for example. And these are academics that come with different backgrounds from different regions of the world. Does bias occur in research in general? Yes, since the decisions are being taken by individuals, we are all prone to bias as individuals, and it does happen. What happens is that as a publisher, we cannot really intervene into academic decisions whether a paper gets accepted or not. So I really cannot, Elsevier cannot tell an editor to accept a paper or to reject a paper. This has to be done completely on behalf of the editors themselves, as well as the reviewers as well. So that's one part of the answer here, is that yes, sometimes editors or reviewers, and it happens across all publishing, sometimes they bring their own bias into the equation. And actually we have been having, so this for the last year, we've been just very thoroughly trying to go through analytics that can, for example, identify bias across gender, for example, in publishing, where geographical bias is also a very important point as well. However, there are efforts actually, so what as publishers, what we do with editors is that we establish overall metrics for the journal, and the overall metrics, we cannot really argue whether a specific paper should be accepted or not, because that's intervening in an academic discussion that we can never do. However, we can only judge by the overall metrics for the entire journal to see like the overall picture of what's going on for all the manuscripts that are working on. So there is something we continuously try to weed out whenever we detect that this kind of thing happens. If you are feeling that there is that whenever an editor is accepting or rejecting a paper, they should always give you feedback on why a paper was accepted or rejected. Okay, so there are two steps of rejection, for example, that could happen. Two types of rejection. An editor can straight right reject your paper and not send it to reviewers, or there is what's called desk rejection. Also, the reviewers, after reading and going through your paper, can start to decide based on the content whether or not to accept a paper based on its academic merit. Okay. So that's part of what goes on. So whether the rejection happened by the reviewers or by the editor, you should always receive feedback on how to, on why the paper was rejected, and ideally that feedback should be insightful enough as to tell you how to make that paper better, and so that you can use the feedback you received from one journal when you are resubmitting to another journal. Or sometimes they can tell you, especially in later review stages, okay, so we are going to reject it now, but we'll be asking you, we are giving you this feedback, and there is a possibility for you to resubmit the paper once more, for example. Then again, you are dealing with tons of individual academics all over the world. So sometimes mistakes happen from individuals, and we usually call them out. So last year, if I remember, last year, for example, we've noticed a pattern that there is a correlation between the citations and the journals, abnormal correlation between citations, between the references being made in papers and the reviewers for these papers, for example. And we called it out ourselves, and we started taking a lot of rectifying actions, because apparently there started to be a malpractice where reviewers could be coercing authors to unrightfully cite their papers. That's a gray area, because in a lot of papers, if I've written a very important and significant paper to the field, and you are using your research and you're not referring to that paper, yes, it's a part of a legitimate feedback I can give as a reviewers at times, but it's a very gray area here, because if that paper is integral to the positioning of the paper within the entire literature, because once again, I was recruited as a reviewer for this paper based on my relevance to the topic. So it makes sure that it can happen that I have intersected very clearly and very strongly with what's being mentioned in the paper, in a paper of mine. However, it's a gray area, but like seeing it happen and seeing a correlation happening very often, for example, that is a malpractice, and we called it out, and we're taking measures to make sure that this is happening in check. It is something that's permissible to do, but overdoing it clearly shows a problem. Just like self-citations. If you are citing your own work, you absolutely have the right to, but if you are excessively citing your own papers, then you're just skewing the metrics. You're not, this is no longer about academic research. This is just about getting a high score, like doing a video game, for example. So it is always part of a continuous discussion. One other thing that we also need to mention, very clearly, is that also related to that topic, it's very important that part of what we're doing here, and part of what I'm personally doing here, is that we, and I'm saying this because I still have my affiliation with, I'm still trying to pick up with my research beside my work with Elsevier and so forth. And this is something we need to do. We need to strive a little bit better ourselves to hone our skills, to improve our skills, to continuously work on those. We are not native speakers, for example, and that's the same issue, by the way. I've talked to a lot of colleagues in Italy or Spain or Russia, or these are developed nations as well. And they would say, yes, we do get a lot of unjust feedback, for example, for having a native going through our paper, for example. And I've met a British colleague who actually received that feedback. It was a double blind, so the reviewer didn't know who the author was, but they've received the feedback, have a native look over your paper, and he was British. Okay, so just, it can happen, but that's something. It also tells us that we also need to build our skills more to present our own ideas and the quality research in a better format when we're writing our papers. By the end of the day, the journals need researchers just as much, if I would say, as the researchers need the journals. If your research is a breakthrough, then journals pretty much love to have it there, because if it goes to another journal, then the success created by that paper will be attributed to that other journal as well, instead of being attributed, for example, to you. I hope that answers the discussion. Dr. Okike and Dr. Zaid, I would like to share the link. Do we close and then show the link first, or just show the link now while you are closing?
I think show the link.
Okay. So this is the link we have here, as you can see on screen. So you would need to get the PowerPoint, to get the presentation in PDF format, as well as the certificate. You'll need to go to researcheracademy.com and sign in using your Elsevier account. That's the same as Mendeley, Scopus, and ScienceDirect. After you sign in, you need to go to this link here. So that's the second step. Go to this link here. It's a page within Researcher Academy as well. That's for the workshop today. The third step is to read the file, how to download your certificate and download the presentation for today. Go through this file, please, very clearly. Make sure that you are following all the proper steps to make sure that the certificate generated will have your name the way you would like it. Because once the certificate has been generated, you cannot change it back. Okay, so make sure you go through this file first. From that same web page, you can download the presentation, download the certificate, using this claim code you have here, starting with the U letter here. So please take a screenshot or write down the link and the code on this page, and make sure to download how to download your certificate, as well as the presentation you need here. And you can find all the links and all the additional materials I've mentioned during the presentation. They are clickable links within the PDF. With this, I've reached the end of my presentation. I'd like to lay back to our generous hosts here, who have accommodated and helped us organize this workshop here today.
Thank you, Khalid. We also want you to send this link to my email so that we can put it on our platform for our users.
If I may advise, Dr. Okike, can we, so we can share the link with everyone. Everyone should be able to download the certificate, to download the presentation, whether or not they have attended. But I would ask all the attendees here and ask your kind selves to keep the claim code for generating certificates for only the people who attended.
Okay.
So as Zoom reports the number of attendees, if the number of certificates generated exceeds that number, it will automatically close the certificate download link again.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Khalid, thank you very much. It has been a wonderful and beautiful presentation. I want now hand over to the University Librarian, Dr. Yetunde Zaid, to close this workshop for us. Dr. Zaid, please unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Tuki. Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Elsevier, our vendor, and Khalid, our presenter, I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar this afternoon. The main focus was actually to enhance our understanding of plagiarism-related mistakes. And by listening to the excellent presentation from Khalid, I'm sure we've gained more understanding on the title of this webinar. I would like to thank our presenter and to everyone involved in planning this webinar. Finally, I want to thank you all for your valuable contribution and attendance. I've seen some of the questions and they were very, very valuable. I want to thank you for your attendance. I want to thank you for coming. And I want to also enjoy the UNILAC community. There's a lot of things that you can benefit from the university library. So for taking out some of the things that you have learned from here today, if you need clarification or more resources or more information on some of our databases, you can please feel free to come to the university library. At this time that people are working from home, we have created remote login for all of our databases just to make research and learning easy, even while you are at home during this lockdown. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid. Bye to all. Dr. Ozai, thank you very much for hosting us.
Thank you.